Today's story is a skydiving disaster story. However, it does not go the way you think it will. And at the end of today's video, there is a very special call to action that is connected to the main story that I think many of you will be very excited to participate in, but no pressure. However, before we get into that story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week, so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story. On the morning of August 1st, 2009, 44-year-old skydiving instructor David Hartzig pulled into the parking lot of Skydive Houston in Texas and then made his way inside. A few minutes later, and Dave, like the rest of his colleagues, was hard at work getting ready for the day before the facility opened up and the inevitable weekend rush began. Skydive Houston is actually just a private airport, and it's not really in Houston. It's located about 30 miles to the northwest of Houston in a city called Waller. The main facility of Skydive Houston is situated right up against this huge, open airfield that basically looks like a big green grass field, and the main facility itself is comprised of several large buildings, one of which is a huge hangar that contains the Super Twin Otter airplanes, which are the little aircraft that bring the skydivers up so they can jump out. Because Skydive Houston offers something called tandem jumping, it gets a lot of first-time jumpers. Tandem jumping is when a skydiving student attaches to the front of their instructor, literally. They're buckled onto them, and then the two of them leap out of the plane together with the student never detaching from the instructor. This method allows the student to just kind of go along for the ride and have no responsibility, while the instructor who's attached to them does everything. They make sure they're both stable in the air. They're the ones that pull the ripper to deploy the chute. They're the ones that land them safely on the ground. And so, obviously, tandem jumping really appeals to first-time jumpers. Dave had finished his 3-year-long training course to become a certified skydiving instructor just a few months earlier. But even prior to going through this course, Dave was already a very experienced skydiver with over 800 jumps to his credit. And the reason he had so many jumps is because Dave loved skydiving. It had given his life a focus that really nothing else ever had. Dave had always been a kind of average guy. He lived in a very modest house in a suburb of Houston, and for much of his life, he had worked very normal blue-collar jobs. Like, he had been a cook at 2 different chain restaurants, he had managed a grocery store, and he also had worked at a soda bottling plant. Dave was divorced and had no kids, but he had a really good group of friends who liked to go to bars and go bowling and played darts. And while Dave was never really unhappy with the way his life was going as he started to creep into his 40s, he couldn't help but think, I haven't really done anything big or important in my life. And so, in 2004, not long after Dave got divorced, one of his good friends asked him if he wanted to go skydiving with him to celebrate that friend's 40th birthday. And Dave immediately thought to himself, this is it. This is a chance to do something big with my life. And so he told the friend, yes, I'd love to go. And after that first jump that Dave did with his friend, Dave was hooked. Whenever Dave was falling through the sky at over 100 miles per hour, it was like nothing else in the whole world even existed. Life became very simple and beautiful. The manager at Skydive Houston saw Dave come in every weekend for years to do all these jumps. And finally, he just offered Dave a job. And so, that was how Dave left the soda bottling plant to become a skydiving instructor. So, August 1st, 2009 was a Saturday, and Saturdays at Skydive Houston were incredibly busy, with basically non-stop tandem jumps all day. Whenever Dave was not working, so he was jumping on his own, he would always pack his own parachute because, like many other skydivers, he liked to make sure it was done exactly right. But when Dave was working, especially on Saturdays when it was so crazy busy, he didn't have time to pack and repack his parachute after every single jump because he was constantly being sent up again and again and again and again and again to take another student. And so, instead, he would take one of the pre-packed parachutes that were left out for instructors inside of their clubhouse. That particular Saturday in August of 2009 went very quickly, with Dave going up one after another with different students, and jumping out, and pulling the chute, and landing safely over and over again. And then finally, at the end of the day, right around 4:00, when Dave was getting ready to be done for the day, his manager came up to him and said, "Hey, do you mind doing one more jump?" And even though Dave was really exhausted, he's dripping sweat, it's super hot outside, he'd done 6 jumps that day, which was a lot, he said, "No problem." Well, it's that time of year again, which means the big game is right around the corner. Right now, trillions of people are rushing to their local owleries to get their mitts on the perfect winged beast for their game day buffalo owl dip. Meanwhile, me and Doel Lumwai focus on what really counts on game day, and that's finger strength. Every day for the past 20 decades, me and Lumwai have been waking up at 1:00 every day and putting our fingers through a grueling power flooding routine so that on game day, when we fire up our gasoline-powered cell phones and load up our DraftKings Sportsbook app, as soon as we see the bets we like, our fingers are so jacked that when we tap on our screens, our fingers go through the phone. Now, does that ruin the phone? Yes. Is it worth it? I don't know, but it jacks us up. Now, does that ruin the phone? Yes. Now, does that ruin the phone? Yes, but is it worth it? Probably not, but it gets me all along jacked up on game day. So if you want to be a betting behemoth like me and Doel Lumwai, then you better put that hooter back in the owlie, or why and head to your local gym and start pumping some finger ire. Because this year I am teaming up with DraftKings to give all new customers a winning offer. All new customers have to do is sign up for DraftKings using my promo code MrBallen's and then bet at least $5 on the big game name, and you will instantly receive an additional $200 in bonus bets. Yes, it really is that simple. New customers who bet $5 on the big game will get $200 extra in bonus bets. Wondering what you could use that $200 in bonus bets on? You could try same-game parlays, where you combine multiple bets from one game, like which team will have the most passing yards and which team will have the first touchdown of the night for even bigger winnings. If mobile sports betting is not yet available in your state, don't worry. You can still get in on the fun with DraftKings Daily Fantasy. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. New customers use promo code MrBallen's and bet $5 on the big game and get $200 instantly in bonus bets. Again, that's promo code MrBallen's, only at DraftKings Sportsbook book. Okay, back to the story. And so, the manager introduced Dave to a short, blonde woman who was visibly nervous, named Shirley Dieger, who was there to celebrate her 54th birthday by skydiving for the first time. Her husband, her son, and her 3 grandkids were also there to watch her from the ground and take pictures. And her other son, who was celebrating his 30th birthday, he too was going skydiving. As soon as Dave walked up to Shirley, he grinned and stuck out his hand. And he made the same kind of corny joke he always made with nervous first-time jumpers, and that was, "Don't worry, you're gonna be just fine. You're gonna be strapped to me, and I'm not about to let anything happen to myself." And so Shirley laughed, and she did seem like she was a little bit at ease. And so Dave patted her on the shoulder. And then he walked over and he grabbed one of the pre-packed parachutes off the wall. These chutes actually contained the parachutes inside of the backpack. There was the main chute, which typically is the only chute that gets deployed on a jump. And then there was the reserve chute, which is a little bit smaller and is not normally used unless there's some sort of emergency where the main chute fails. After every jump, because the main chute has been deployed, it gets repacked and stuffed back into the backpack pack. But the reserve chute, because it almost never gets deployed, just stays packed. And so Skydive Houston, like basically every other skydiving facility, has certified technicians come in periodically to test the reserve chutes inside of the bag to make sure they're still packed exactly right. After grabbing the pre-packed parachute off the wall, Dave walked back over to Shirley, who was now in the staging area putting on her flight suit. A flight suit is a single garment, kinda looks like a big onesie for an adult. And so Dave walked over, he put the parachute down, he tugged and pulled on her flight suit to make sure it was good, and then after he was satisfied, He picked the parachute back up and he signaled to Shirley, as well as Shirley's son, who was also skydiving, to follow him. So the trio, they left the staging area. They went outside, right to the airfield where there was a super twin out of idling and other jumpers were climbing on board to go for a jump. And so Dave, Shirley, and Shirley's son got in line, they boarded the plane, and a few minutes later, they were airborne. As the plane slowly climbed up to 13,500 feet, which is the jumping altitude, Shirley was sitting directly in front of Dave. They were on a bench seat on the back right of this little airplane, and Dave made a point of talking to Shirley and asking her where she was from and what she did to kind of ease her nerves. Shirley would tell Dave that this was not the kind of thing that she typically did. In fact, she told Dave that her other son who was jumping with them, when he first decided he wanted to try skydiving a year earlier, she had desperately tried to talk him out of it, saying it was too dangerous. But recently, Shirley and her husband had decided that they needed to be more adventurous. They lived in a quiet town in rural Texas where Shirley was a mail carrier and her husband worked in a mine, and their lives were just kind of simple and very routine-oriented and kind of boring. So when Shirley's son, who was skydiving with them that day, had asked Shirley to go skydiving on her 54th birthday, she saw it as an opportunity to break the mold and do something adventurous. And so she said yes. And so Dave told Shirley about how he had discovered skydiving much the same way she had, and they really bonded over that. About 20 minutes after takeoff, all the tandem jumpers on the plane were now attached to their instructors. So Shirley was now buckled onto Dave. And then, when they reached 13,500 feet, the jumping altitude, one of the instructors slid open the side door. It was time to jump. And the first one who was jumping was Shirley's son. And so from all the way back in the plane, Shirley called out to her son, "Have a good jump. I'll see you on the ground," as her son kind of waddled to the edge of the door with his instructor, and the two of them jumped out and disappeared into the air below. Next up was Shirley. So Dave told Shirley very calmly to stand up. And so they did. They stood up right next to their bench, and then before they waddled towards the exit, Dave, for what felt like the millionth time, checked to make sure he really was securely fastened onto Shirley. And then Dave tapped his ripper right behind him, kind of like muscle memory, reminding himself where to go. He tapped his knife on his shoulder. He kind of just felt his equipment. And then, feeling ready, he said, "Okay, Shirley, let's go away." And then the two of them kind of waddled their way towards the front of the plane where that door was slid wide open. And then they turned so Shirley's feet were right on the edge, basically looking out into the sky right outside. So it's really loud, it's very windy, and Dave is right in Shirley's ear saying, "Okay, I'm gonna count to 3 and we're gonna jump." And then Dave reached forward, he pulled Shirley's head back so she was looking up, because he didn't want her to look down when they leapt out, because for some people, that will cause them to panic when they see the ground. And so with Shirley's head back, Dave very calmly said, 1, 2, 3, and then very gracefully, the two of them jumped out. From the moment you jump out of a plane at 13,500 feet until you touch the ground, it takes maybe 2 to 3 minutes, with about 30 seconds to a minute of actual free fall. But that 2 to 3 minutes is so intense, it feels like it's 20 minutes long. And this was what Dave loved so much about skydiving, that intense presence you feel that you're really in the moment. There's nothing else you can think about. It's just you careening through the sky towards the earth. It's incredible. Dave had actually had a number of close calls in his life. Like a few years earlier, he had been riding his motorcycle when somebody hit him in their car and he fractured his skull. And then, not long after that accident, he was in another accident where he fractured his spine. And after each of those accidents and a few others, the only thought in Dave's mind was, "Oh my goodness, I hope I can skydive again." And miraculously, he had made full recoveries and he was back to skydiving each time. And so now, whenever he jumped out of a plane, he just felt so lucky. The plan for that evening's jump was for Dave to rotate them 360 degrees 3 separate times, so Shirley could get a full look down across Houston and all over Texas, and just kind of see the world around her from so high up in the air. And then, whenever Dave noticed that they were at 5,000 feet, using his wrist altimeter, which is basically like a watch, that tells you how far you are from the ground, Dave would pull the ripper. The main chute would deploy, and they would float gently down to the ground. And at first, that is how this jump went. After they exited the plane, they stabilized in the proper horizontal position with Shirley in front, her stomach pointing toward the ground, and Dave, obviously right behind her, controlling the skydive. And then, after a few seconds, Dave slightly changed his body position and began rotating them 360 degrees, so Shirley could look down and see all the highways, and cars and barns, and houses in the city off in the distance. I mean, it's this spectacular view. And as you're falling through the sky, especially in the first few seconds of a jump, you can't tell that you're going super fast, but you're going over 120 miles an hour, which is called terminal velocity. It's literally the fastest you can fall in the air. And so you're blazing towards the ground, but it almost feels like the air is pushing you back up. And so Shirley's having this incredible first-time experience, just really taking it all in. And Dave, even though he had done this hundreds of times, was having a wonderful time as well, but Dave really was just focused on his altimeter because when they hit 5,000 feet, he needed to pull the parachute. And so they're cruising along, Dave's checking his altimeter over and over again, and then finally, he sees 5,000 feet. He quickly looks around him to scan for any other jumpers, he's clear, and so he reached back and he pulled his rippered handle for his main chute. Now normally, when you deploy your main parachute, depending on what kind of parachute you're using, there's actually kind of a slow unfurling. It's not like suddenly the chute is deployed and then you just stop. That would not work. You get destroyed every time you skydive. So the way it's packed is it kind of unfurls slowly, and it's like a gradual slowing down. But after Dave had pulled the rippered handle, there was an immediate yank of the parachute backpack up and away from him, and then from somewhere above him, he heard a loud popping sound. Now, Dave had jumped enough times to know that this was not normal. There was a problem, and he would be right. The main parachute had deployed out of the backpack, but it got tangled on the way out, and so it did not inflate at all. And so, as a result, it was not slowing them down at all. But worse than that was this tangled up parachute was still attached to them, and it kind of became like a sail. And it turned Dave and Shirley onto their sides and began whipping them around in something called a death spiral, where, literally, you're just spinning so unbelievably fast that normally jumpers will actually lose consciousness. They're spinning so fast, but Dave, being a very experienced skydiver, he tried to stay calm. He tried to track his way out of this death spiral, which is when you put your arms and legs straight and try to go in a straight line through the air. But it didn't work. He just kept on spinning faster and faster and faster. And at this point, Shirley, she's practically losing consciousness. She's yelling what's going on, and Dave is just trying to stay calm. He's still trying to get out of it, but he knows there's no way. But Dave remembers he has two knives, and so he decides he's going to cut away this tangled main chute and then deploy his reserve chute, because you don't want to open your reserve directly into a tangled parachute. And so he reaches up. He's spinning. Remember, he reaches up and he grabs the first knife. However, the lines of the tangled parachute had actually tangled on his shoulder strap, where that first knife was, and so he literally couldn't get to the knife. And so now, they're below 5,000 feet. They're like 4,000, closing in on 3,000 feet. I mean, they're coming close to the ground here, and they don't have a canopy. But Dave, he stays calm. Spinning around, he can't get that first knife, and so he reaches for the second knife, which was placed in front of Shirley. But because of how quickly they were spinning, he couldn't quite get his arm out to grab the second knife. It was just impossible to grab it. And so, without any other options, Dave had to pull his reserve chute, knowing it was going to go straight into this tangled mess right above them. And so the reserve chute, it deploys, and it does work, at least at first. There's that gradual slowing down sensation that Dave immediately feels. The spin begins to stop, and for a second, it seems like they're going to be saved by this reserve chute, caused by now, They're only about 2,000 feet from the ground. However, the worst-case scenario happens to Dave and Shirley. As soon as their reserve chute was up over their head, inflated, their main chute suddenly caught air and inflated as well. So they had to parachutes. Now, you can land with 2 parachutes, absolutely. However, sometimes in a worst-case scenario, the 2 parachutes will catch wind going in opposite directions. So basically, the parachutes will go out to either side of the jumper or jumpers, if it's tandem, and then you basically have wings that aim the jumper straight at the ground. It's like an accelerant. It causes them to literally speed up straight towards the ground. And once you start moving in this position, which is known as a downplane, it's almost impossible to get out of it because the faster you go, the more inflated these 2 parachutes become. And so, Dave knows they are less than 2,000 feet from the ground. They're at a downplane, which is almost always fatal. And so all he can do is try to get out of the downplane. And so Dave, with all his might, he begins yanking on the different lines of both parachutes. And he manages to get them out of the downplane, which is nearly impossible to do. He does it, and then both parachutes collapse. And suddenly, Dave and Shirley have no parachute. They're less than 1,000 feet from the ground, and they are falling once again over 100 miles per hour straight down to the earth. Now at this moment, Shirley is crying, she's screaming. She doesn't know what's going on. And Dave has this incredible sense of calm come over him. Years ago, Dave had given up on the idea of ever having a family, or of having a family, or of having kids. He was a really good guy who would have been a great father, but it just wasn't in the cards for him. Instead, Dave had found skydiving. Oftentimes, Dave would stay late at Skydive Houston and just sit around the campfire with the other instructors and the other jumpers, and drink beers, and eat burgers, and tell stories. And sometimes Dave would even sleep the night at Skydive Houston because he didn't want to go back home to his empty 3-bedroom house, where all he wanted to do when he was there was go skydiving again. But now, literally staring down his own death, knowing that it's going to happen any second, the only thing he could think about was Shirley. He didn't care if he died, he felt like he had found his calling. If he died doing it, so be it. But Shirley, her husband, her son on the ground, her son skydiving, her 3 grandkids. They're gonna see Shirley hit the ground and die. He just couldn't handle it. He thought, I have to do something to protect Shirley. And with only a few hundred feet to the ground, Dave yelled to Shirley, tuck your knees up. And Shirley immediately did it. She threw her knees up, and as she did, Dave pulled back as hard as he possibly could on the risers and the toggles in an attempt to switch places with Shirley. Shirley was in front of him. Her body's gonna hit the ground first. Dave flipped them around so that his back was gonna hit the ground first. He was going to sacrifice himself to maybe save Shirley. When they hit the ground, people a quarter mile away heard their impact. And when they hit the ground, all of Shirley's family saw it. Everybody saw it. They went running over to the crash site, and when they got there was this tangle of bodies in this parachute. And as they're staring at it, they watched one of the bodies move. It was Shirley. She was alive. After paramedics arrived, they cut her off of Dave's body and they rushed her to the hospital, where she had serious injuries. She had several broken vertebrae and very significant internal injuries, but none of them were life-threatening. She would survive. However, 3 days after arriving in the hospital, Shirley got devastating news. Dave had been rushed to the hospital as well, right after Shirley had been rushed to the hospital as well, right after Shirley had. But he finally had succumbed to his injuries and passed away. Dave's last-ditch maneuver had worked. He had saved Shirley's life at the cost of his own. However, not long after Shirley and her family found out about Dave's death, they got another call. And this time, it was to tell them that the news about Dave's death was premature. He was not dead. However, he was paralyzed from the neck down. A few weeks later, after Shirley got out of the hospital, she immediately went to the intensive care unit where Dave was being treated to see him for the first time since their accident. And when she saw him, he was sitting in a wheelchair, covered in tubes and wires, and she just stood there looking at him. And Dave, when he saw Shirley, he just started to cry. At this point, Shirley walked up to him, she gave him a hug, and she said, "I love you." Today, Dave and Shirley are still friends. Shirley has recovered completely because of Dave's heroic act. Dave, on the other hand, remains paralyzed and only has a little bit of feeling in his right arm. He now lives in Texas with his mother, who looks after him full-time, and they desperately need our support. My family has already made a donation to his GoFundMe page, and I hope some of you will do the same thing. You can find his GoFundMe page in the description below, and after speaking with him, he assured me that all of the donation money is being used to take care of himself. He has a lot of care that he needs. His mom can't do it alone, and so anything we give them is just making his life a little bit easier. I always tell my oldest daughter to do things that scare her because oftentimes, those are the things we actually want to do the most. And so today, I'm going to live up to what I always tell my kid to do, because today I'm announcing my first ever live storytelling show. Doing a live event has always been so interesting to me, but it's actually just kind of terrified me, and so I gotta do it. It's going to be a digital live experience on February 16th, so roughly 2 weeks from now. And because it's so close to Valentine's Day, we decided to call this show the Valentine's Day Show. And this one, our long show, will just be me at my desk, with no script, telling you crazy, strange, dark, and mysterious stories in real time. If this first show goes really well and people enjoy it, they want more of it, then I think there's a real chance we transition to a full-scale tour, or maybe I could be telling love stories in campgrounds, or in locations where some of these stories have taken place. We don't know yet, but it all starts with this first show. So to show your support and to tell us that you want a live tour, go get your tickets now. There's even some really cool, special, limited edition Valentine's Day merch that you can get as part of a ticket bundle. Also, I'll be doing the live QA after the show that you can get a pass to as well. Go to Moment. Call MrBallen's to get your tickets, to get your merch, to get your after-party passes. Again, that's Moment. Call MrBallen's. Happy Valentine's Day. So, that's gonna do it. If you got something out of today's episode and you haven't done this already, please sneak into the like button's house and replace their cat with an identical looking cat. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. We now have a podcast called the MrBallen's Podcast that puts out brand new podcast exclusive stories on Monday mornings, and on Thursday mornings, we put up the remastered audio of our best YouTube videos. Again, it's called the MrBallen's Podcast, and it's available exclusively on Amazon Music. We have 2 additional YouTube channels. One is called MrBallen's Shorts, the other is called MrBallen's en Español. We post near daily content on TikTok, Facebook, and Snapchat. All of those pages are just called MrBallen's. If you want to get in touch with me, please follow me on any major social media platform and then send me a direct message. My username is just MrBallen's, and I really do read the majority of my DMs. Check out our merch at shopmrballen.com. And if you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit, just called MrBallen's. It's linked in the description below. So whether I see you on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, read it, YouTube, Facebook, other YouTube channels, the podcast, wherever, just know that I really appreciate your support. And until next time, that's gonna do it. See ya. Our stories typically have really big plot twists at the end, and today's story is no different. However, the plot twist today is so unexpected, so abrupt, so shocking, so horrifying, that I thought it would be interesting if you all tried to guess the ending as you're watching it. And you put your guesses in the comments section, and then we'll see if anybody comes even remotely close to what the ending actually is. I gotta be honest, I don't think anybody is gonna guess this one. But before we get into that story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story. In the late summer of 1930, Raphael Pensardi and his wife, Lenarda Chanchollife, moved with there for young kids to a little town in northern Italy called Correggio. A terrible earthquake had destroyed the family's previous village and killed nearly all of their neighbors, and so this family was feeling very lucky to be alive. But when they arrived in Correggio, they really had nothing and were hoping that, the people of this town will just be very welcoming and generous and kind of help them get set up again. And the people of this town did exactly that. Correggio was this beautiful place inside of a fertile valley where people lived in these cottages surrounded by rice fields and mulberry trees. And the people who lived there were very tight-knit and cooked for each other and had parties together. I mean, this was a real community. And so when Raphael and Leonardo arrived, the townspeople immediately found them this cute little cottage by a stream with a whitewashed front door and a beautiful stone hearth for cooking. And there was an attached storefront on this cottage that they were giving them. And then, on top of that, once the family had moved in, the family's new neighbors helped get Raphael a job. And they also helped Leonardo set up the attached storefront that was part of their cottage so she could sell her homemade soap bars out of the shop. And so, very quickly, the family just completely fell in love with Correggio. Especially 36-year-old Leonardo. Losing her home and her previous neighbors in that terrible earthquake had been a tragedy on an epic scale. But it was far from the first tragedy that Leonardo had been forced to live through. Leonardo had been born into poverty. Her mother had actually come from a very wealthy family, but they had cut Leonardo's mom off when she became pregnant with Leonardo. And so when Leonardo's mom gave birth to her, she blamed Leonardo for their poverty and all of their problems, and so beat her relentlessly. And then on top of that, Leonardo's father died when she was very young, and so she was stuck at home being abused constantly by her mother. When Leonardo was 21, she met Raphael and fell in love with him, and he was a very kind and gentle man. He really made a very strong first impression on anyone who met him. But when Leonardo went to her mother and introduced Raphael to her and said, "I'm gonna marry this man. I love him," her mother flew into a rage and then literally cursed Leonardo. She actually out loud muttered the spell, and then told Leonardo that because of the spell, Leonardo would have evil following her forever, ever. Now, of course, Leonardo was very used to her mother's terrible behavior, and so she did not actually think she was at risk of this curse affecting her life in any way. But not long after actually marrying Raphael, Leonardo began to see evidence that this curse might actually be real. It started with Leonardo having these sudden fits of seizures for no particular reason. And then Leonardo, every time she got pregnant, she would miscarry and lose the baby. And so, feeling really sad and desperate because all she wanted was a family, Leonardo actually went to a fortune teller in hopes that they would tell her that in the future her life got better, not worse, which to Leonardo meant, the curse was not real if my life improves. But after this fortune teller took Leonardo's hands and studied her palms, she looked up at Leonardo and gave her grave news. She said, "Leonardo, you're going to have living children, but they're all going to die young. And I see a prison and an insane asylum in your future." This experience totally shocked Leonardo and confirmed for her that her mother's curse must be real. And sure enough, over the following years, Leonardo and Raphael would go on to have 14 living children, and 10 of them would die when they were babies or toddlers. And so, by the time Leonardo had arrived in Correggio with her family in 1930, she was absolutely petrified that her last four precious children would die because of this curse. And so, in order to keep her kids safe, she basically never let them out of her sight. And then she also made sure they always adhered to these strange rules and beliefs that Leonardo had come up with about good and evil that were designed to somehow protect the kids from this curse. But the incredible show of generosity and support and kindness that Leonardo and her family had experienced when they arrived in Correggio had really done something to Leonardo. In fact, it really kind of changed the way she viewed the world. Suddenly, she was less concerned with this curse and how to protect her family from it, and instead, she was just kind of content. She felt safe. She felt happy. The women in the town loved Leonardo and always came by the house to say hi to her and eat some of the amazing tea cakes that she would make. And also, Leonardo had become best friends with this woman named Virginia, who was a former opera singer from Milan who was very elegant and beautiful. And every time she went to a dinner party, she would invite Leonardo. And also, Leonardo and her family were becoming financially stable, really for the first time ever. Leonardo's soap shop that she ran out of their cottage was really successful. People came from all around to buy her soaps because nobody could make them like she could make them like she could. And Raphael's job as a clerk was very steady, and he too was becoming well respected in town. And so, because of how well this transition to Correggio had been, at some point, Leonardo made a promise, both to herself and to the universe, that instead of focusing all of her time and energy on this curse, which had plagued her whole life, instead she was going to focus on helping the people of Correggio any way she could, because they had done so much for her. And that is exactly what Leonardo did. But in a kind of ironic way, because of the fear Leonardo had for her mother's curse. She had gone to that fortune teller many years ago, and even though the news she got when she saw the fortune teller was horrible, Leonardo had left that experience kind of fascinated with the art of fortune telling and magic and sorcery. It just really appealed to her. And so now that Leonardo was running this very successful soap shop out of her house, there were all these people coming from far and wide that would ask to barter for her soaps. Bartering is like trading one item for another item versus paying for something outright with money. And so Leonardo began bartering with these travelers whenever they had books about fortune telling, about magic, about sorcery, about how to make potions, about the occult. And after reading through all of these books and learning as much as she could, Leonardo, in addition to selling her soaps, began offering fortune and telling services to the people of Correggio. And it would turn out she was really good at predicting the future, to the point where people in town basically began going to her for all kinds of advice. She helped women find love. She told farmers what crops to plant. She created these charm bags for people and told them they would protect them. She also began creating these herb potions for people when they got sick. It actually got to the point where people trusted her so much that when they got sick, they didn't even go to the doctor, they just went to her. And so, very quickly, Leonardo felt very proud of the fact that she had lived up to the promise she had made both to herself and to the universe to always help the people of Correggio at every turn. But more than that, Leonardo was starting to think that this newfound sense of purpose and happiness she was getting in helping the people of Correggio through her various services had finally broken her mother's curse. By 1939, Leonardo and her family had been living in Correggio very happily for almost 10 years. And at the time, Leonardo's oldest son, Giuseppe, was 17 years old. Giuseppe was tall, he was handsome, he had dark hair, he had dark eyes, and all the girls loved him. And Giuseppe and Leonardo had always had a very close relationship. Every day, Giuseppe would come home and he and his mom would sit in the kitchen, and they would chat for a while and eat some of her cakes. But now, in 1939, when Giuseppe was 17, he started to act a little bit different. He would come home and instead of going into the kitchen to sit with Leonardo, he would just go straight to his room and shut the door. And when Leonardo or Raphael would ask him, "Hey, is everything okay, Giuseppe?" Giuseppe would get very defensive and say he was fine and to please just leave me alone. But to Leonardo, it seemed really obvious that her son was not fine, and she thought, maybe he has some sort of secret he's keeping, and that's what's making him act this way. He's hurting on the inside, but he can't share it with the world. But Leonardo had no idea what this secret might be. And then, one day late that same year, Leonardo was walking through town when one of her neighbors came up to her and said, "Hey, are you aware that your son Giuseppe has signed up for the military, and he's leaving for training in just a few months?" Leonardo had not heard about this. People were talking a lot about World War II, which had just started around this time. But Leonardo had never considered that her precious son would go off to fight in that war. But now, Leonardo realized that Giuseppe's recent strange behavior suddenly made sense. This was the secret he was keeping. He had joined the military and he hadn't told his family. Leonardo turned around and went straight home. She went right into her bedroom, shut the door, and she just sobbed. To her, it felt like her mother's curse was back, and now her precious son was going to go off into the war and he was going to die, unless she found a way to combat this evil that was now following her. Again, thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring today's video. Growing up, I was always encouraged to speak up if I was feeling down or sad. And so as a kid, talking about my feelings was really easy. But fast forward to 2017 when I was in my late 20s and suffering for the first time from a severe bout of depression. It was like I knew what I was supposed to do, ask for help, but I just couldn't do it. It was like I was afraid if I told someone what my issues were, it would scare them, or worse, it would make them feel bad to be. Luckily, my wife and my family encouraged me to go seek out a therapist, and honestly, that totally changed my life. But the point I'm trying to make here is that, because of my upbringing, I should have been the first person in line for therapy right when I started struggling in 2017, but that's just not how life works. Oftentimes, the way we think we will act during a crisis is very different from how we actually act during a real crisis. So, if you are struggling right now with your own personal crisis and you're hiding it from other people, you haven't asked for help yet. Stop, take a deep breath, and do what I did, consider therapy. And one of the easiest entry points into therapy is BetterHelp because it's a world-class therapy service that is 100% online, which means you don't have to physically go into a doctor's office and awkwardly wait for your big first meeting with a therapist. Instead, you can get the help you need from the comfort of your home. Get matched with a BetterHelp therapist after filling out a quick survey, and then you can choose how you want to communicate with your therapist, whether that's through chat, or text, or phone call, or video call, or some combination of all of them. Also, you can switch your therapist at any time for free. Get 10% off your first month at BetterHelp. MrBallen's. I've also linked them in the description below. Okay, back to the story. For the next several days, Leonarda did not open up her soap shop. She didn't come downstairs. She just stayed locked in her bedroom and read through all of her books about magic and sorcery and the occult, looking for some sort of solution for how to fight this curse. And finally, she figured out what she had to do. She read that if she gave something beautiful to the universe would reward her, and in Leonarda's mind, that reward would be sparing her son. And so Leonarda decided that the most beautiful thing she could offer the universe would be to help the people of Correggio, which she was already doing. But in her mind, she thought she could really ramp up her efforts and really try to change people's lives. And she thought if she could do that, the universe was sure to notice and it would save her son's life. Leonarda decided that the first person she would really go above and beyond to help inside of Correggio was a woman named Faustina. Faustina, who was in her 72nd, was desperate to get married, but too many people in town, including Leonarda, she seemed kind of beyond help. She was totally antisocial, she was awkward, and just kind of given her age, it seemed like marriage was just not in the cards for her. But this is where Leonardo thought she could step in and change everything for Faustina. She would find her a husband. So Leonardo reached out to Faustina and told her about a friend of hers, a man who lived in a city to the north who was also alone in his old agent who was likely looking for marriage, and she could set them up if Faustina was interested. And so Faustina was immediately interested and wanted to meet this guy. But Leonardo did tell her that, this guy, the reason he's not married is he's kind of difficult to be around. He's kind of a jerk, but he's got a wonderful heart. He means well. I think he'd be a great fit for you. And so again, Faustina's like, great. I want to meet him. I want to marry him. I'm ready here. And then finally, the day came when Faustina actually went to this other town and met this guy in person. And they fell in love, and Faustina just moved right in with him. And before long, she was sending happy postcards back to Correggio, telling everyone about how happy she was and how thankful she was for Leonardo's help in setting them up. And so Leonardo was obviously thrilled, not only for her friend's happiness, but also it really felt like she had checked the box in terms of really going above and beyond to help someone in Correggio in an effort to get the universe to spare her son. But her son was still a couple months away from leaving for training, and Leonardo, she's very superstitious, and she's thinking, okay, I don't know if that was enough to get the universe to save my son, and so I need to find somebody else I can help. So in September of 1940, Leonardo began her next good deed project with another woman in town. She was a widow in her 50s named Francesca. She had worked as a teacher, but when her husband got sick, she quit her job, and then when her husband ultimately died, she was left with nothing. So Leonardo reached out to Francesca and told her that she, Leonardo, would be willing to reach out to her own mother's rich family to see if maybe they had a job they could finesse for Francesca. Now, of course, Leonardo was not excited about talking to her mother's family, who had disowned her mother and had shown no interest in Leonardo. But Leonardo wanted to do this for Francesca, and for the sake of her son and getting the universe to notice what she was doing. And so sure enough, Leonardo would reach out to her mother's family, and they were remarkably open to the idea, and they got a job for Francesca in Switzerland. And so eventually Francesca jetted off to Switzerland, and then a couple of days later, she was sending postcards back to Korea, saying how happy she was and how thankful she was for Leonardo's help. And so again, Leonardo was so happy about this outcome, both because she cared about Francesca and also because this was yet another kind of check in the box of her good deeds that the universe was going to notice, in turn, would save her son. But again, after Francesca didn't need any more help, Leonardo found herself looking at her son, who was getting closer and closer to leaving for training, and she would think to herself, have I done enough to protect him? Have I really stopped this curse from killing him after he leaves? And Leonardo eventually decided that no, she had not done enough. She needed to do at least one more really big good deed for someone in this town. And who better to help than her best friend Virginia, the former opera singer. Leonardo knew from all her talks with Virginia that Virginia really missed living in the big city and going to the opera house. And so Leonardo reached out to Virginia and said, you know what? I can reach out to my mother's rich family, and maybe they can find a job for you in a big city if you're interested. And so Virginia was like, wow, yes, I would love that. That's an amazing opportunity. And so Leonardo again would contact her mother's rich family, and again they came through, finding this job as a social planner for this very rich guy in Florence, Italy, who often funded plays and operas. And so this job was perfect for Virginia. When Leonardo told Virginia about this opportunity, Virginia cried tears of joy. After packing up all of her things, Virginia made a stop at Leonardo's house to say goodbye and thank you, and the two women would hug and laugh and cry. They would drink wine together, and then finally, when it was time for Virginia to go, even though Leonardo was very sad, she was also quite happy because finally, she felt like this good deed was enough to get the universe to spare her son. However, Leonardo, being a very superstitious person, did have one more little thing she wanted to do with Giuseppe before he left for the military. And this little thing was her, Leonardo, bathing her son, her 18-year-old son, with a particular bar of soap, and then she also wanted to feed him a special kind of tea cake that she was going to make. The soap and the tea cake had these special herbs and ingredients, and different things she had pulled from her books of magic and the occult, and they would kind of form like a protective barrier, both outside and inside of Giuseppe. So on the same night that Virginia headed off to Florence, when Giuseppe came home, Leonardo approached him and said, I want to give you this bath, and I want to feed you these tea cakes. And Giuseppe was not remotely enthused at the idea of having his mom bathe him. He's 18, but he knew she was highly superstitious. She seemed pretty emotional about this, and it just seemed like it was extremely important to her. And so he said, okay. And so Leonardo washed her son with this special kind of magic soap, and then she also gave him the tea cakes. And then afterward, even though Giuseppe was really annoyed by what he had just been asked to do, Leonardo was so happy she was practically floating. She felt like she had done everything she could possibly do, and now she could just relax because her son was safe. But soon, Leonardo would learn that that was not actually true. A few days after giving her son the magical last bath and magical tea cakes, the police showed up at the front door of Leonardo's house. And when she opened the door and saw the police, she asked what was going on. And the police would say to her, hey, the 3 women that you supposedly helped that left town recently, they've all been reported missing by their families. They don't know where they are. And so Leonardo, she was totally shocked by this. And she said, no. She said, no. Duh. That's not possible. I write to them all the time. I get postcards that come in very regularly from all of them. And then Leonardo went and got the postcards and showed the police, like, look, I'm talking to them. How could they possibly be missing? And so the police, they would look at these letters, and they would agree with Leonardo that it is pretty strange that she'd be getting these very authentic seeming letters from these women if these women were also missing. And so eventually the police would leave, and they would tell Leonardo that they would be in touch if they needed anything. And then over the next couple of days, Leonardo was very concerned about these 3 women. But she received numerous postcards from these women over those several days, and all of these postcards were totally normal seeming. And so Leonardo was fairly confident that whatever was going on with the police had to have been a mix-up, and she wouldn't be hearing from them again. But a couple of weeks later, the police did come back to Leonardo's house, except this time they didn't knock. They just barged right in. After the police had spoken with Leonardo that first time, they did some digging on these letters that she was receiving, and they managed to trace them all back to their start point. And it turned out all of these letters from all 3 of these women were originating from one place. It was this little town to the north of Correggio. And when police went to this little town, they discovered that these letters that were starting in this little town were all being mailed by the same person. And they got a physical description of this person who apparently was pretending to be these 3 women, and the description was of a tall, handsome young man with dark hair and dark eyes. It was Giuseppe. After the police barged into Leonardo's house, they went straight to Giuseppe's room, where they accused him of murdering those 3 women. And then they hauled him out of the house and brought him to the station to question him about where he dumped the bodies. When the last police officer left Leonardo's house, Leonardo walked outside and just stood there, wondering what she was going to do. It was like she had done everything in her power to protect her son from this curse, but somehow, this curse, she knew, had done this to her son. And so now she knew there was only one thing she could do. Without saying anything to her husband, she went inside, she got her things, and she began making her way to the police station. At this point in her life, Leonardo looked much older than her actual age of 46. She had very gray hair, her face was very wrinkled, and she was stooped over, and she was always carrying these charm bags and magical potions, and little stick figures that she claimed protected her family. And so her overall appearance when she wandered into the police station was that of a very frail old woman who was also very strange. And so Leonardo hobbled her way up to the front desk, and in a trembling voice, she asked the attendant if she could speak to the detective who was working on her son's case. And then a moment later, she was led into an interview room where she was told to wait. And then, a little while later, the lead detective walked into the room. He sat down across the table from Leonardo, and he said, "What can I do for you?" And immediately, Leonardo said, "My son, Giuseppe, is innocent." And the detective, when he heard this, he was not remotely surprised. In fact, this is fully what he expected this conversation was going to be. He knew Leonardo loved her some very much, and of course she was going to say he was innocent. This is what parents typically did in cases like this. But the detective decided he wouldn't try to stop her. He would just let this very distraught mother kind of talk for a bit. He would tell her that he would follow up on whatever she was saying, and then he would doctor her back home. But this detective was not expecting the things that would come out of Leonardo's mouth over the next couple of hours. In fact, her story about why Giuseppe was innocent was so shocking and so bizarre that the detective outright said, "I don't believe you. I don't believe this. This can't be true." And then other officers were called in to listen to her story to see if they believed it, and they just said, "This doesn't seem real." But the police would follow up on the details she gave, and it all checked out. It would turn out back in late 1939, on the day that Faustina, the first woman that Leonardo pledged to help in order to get the universe to save her son, when Faustina was set to go north and meet her future husband, Faustina stopped by Leonardo's house to say bye. And when she was in Leonardo's house, something very unexpected happened. When Faustina walked into Leonardo's kitchen where Leonardo was, Faustina was so excited about meeting her potential future husband that her hands were shaking and she was smiling ear to ear to ear to ear. And so Leonardo said to Faustina, "Hey, you need to calm down." And so she handed Faustina a glass of wine. And so Faustina took the wine, and she had a couple of sips of wine, and right away, Faustina started feeling dizzy. And before long, she was grabbing the table just to keep from falling over. It would turn out the wine was poisoned by Leonardo. And so Faustina, she's kind of looking up at Leonardo, and Leonardo is looking down at her, and she's got an axe in one of her hands. And she says to Faustina, "I'm so sorry." And then she winds up, and she strikes Faustina in the chest with the axe and lodges it in her chest. And so she lets go of it, expecting Faustina to die. She doesn't. Faustina's just standing there with an axe in her chest. And so Leonardo grabbed the handle of the axe, she pulled it out of her chest, and then began wailing on her head over and over and over again until Faustina did fall to the ground dead. Then Leonardo lit a fire under her big metal pot on the stove, and then she cut Faustina's body into 9 pieces. She drained the blood out of the body into a bucket, and then she chucked those 9 pieces into the pot on the stove and began to mix them with caustic soda, which is a powerful dissolving agent that's used to make soap. And then she boiled the ingredients, her body parts in this caustic soda, for hours. Faustina's body slowly turned into this horrible black mush inside of this pot. And Leonardo was watching this the whole time. And she just had a look of total disappointment as this was happening. And then at some point, she just took the pot off the stove and dumped the ingredients, Faustina's body, down the septic tank. And then Leonardo waited for Faustina's blood that she had dumped out to coagulate, which means it became semi-solid. And then she heated it up in the oven, then ground it into flour. And she would use that flour to make tea cakes, which she fed to her friends the next day, as well as her son, Giuseppe. Leonardo also asked her son to mail some letters for her from the little town to the north where Faustina had supposedly gone. These letters, of course, were written by Leonardo pretending to be Faustina to give the impression that she was still alive and well. And Giuseppe, when he was told to go mail these letters, didn't think anything of it. He was used to doing errands for his mom. Even though Leonardo basically got away with killing Faustina, her plan for Faustina had not really gone the way Leonardo had hoped. When she boiled Faustina's chopped up body parts in this caustic soda, they didn't really mix the way she wanted them to. Leonardo was convinced that the reason for this is because Faustina was too skinny, and so there wasn't enough fat on her body for the mix to be perfect. So Leonardo had come up with another elaborate story, this time for another woman, Francesca, about that job in Switzerland she got through her mother's rich family, of course. None of that was true. And when Francesca came by Leonardo's house to say goodbye to her, she was offered a glass of poisoned wine. And after she sipped from it, she became dizzy, and then Leonardo showed up with an axe and hacked Francesca to death. But again, when the body parts and the caustic soda were in the pot on the stove boiling together, they were still not coming together the way Leonardo wanted. And so again, Leonardo, with a look of disgust, just dumped the pot down the septic tank and wound up making tea cakes from Francesca's blood. Then the next day, she fed those tea cakes to her friends as well as Giuseppe. And she also asked Giuseppe to send a few more letters from up north. These letters were, of course, from Francesca. Still feeling totally unsatisfied with how the last 2 killings had gone, Leonardo moved on to her third target, her best friend, Virginia. And this time, when Virginia came by Leonardo's house to say goodbye, everything went to plan. Leonardo was able to poison Virginia. She killed her with the axe. She chopped her up. She put her in the pot. And this time, the 9 chunks of her body mixed beautifully with the caustic soda. And so, after adding a few fine perfumes into the pot, Leonardo was finally able to create the thing that she had not been able to create with the other 2 women's bodies, and that was a beautiful, rich, creamy bar of soap. She also, again, made tea cakes from Virginia's blood. That night, when Giuseppe came home, Leonardo demanded that she be allowed to bathe him with her magic soap. the soap made from Virginia's body. And so she did that. She scrubbed him with Virginia's body soap, and then while she was doing that, she fed him the tea cakes that were made from Virginia's blood. It would turn out Leonardo did, in fact, believe that in order to save her son from this curse, she would need to give something beautiful to the universe. And at first, she really had believed that the way to do that was by helping the people of Correggio, above and beyond anything she had ever done before. But at some point during her interactions with Faustina, the first woman, Leonardo had decided that, you know what, that wasn't enough. She really needed to make sure that her son was going to be safe. And so the only way, really, that Leonardo could guarantee her son would be safe would be if she actually took a life and gave that back to the universe. That would save her son. The reason Leonardo wound up taking 3 lives and not just 1 life is because she also decided that, as an extra protective measure, she wanted to make sure that she actually bathed her son literally in the body parts and kind of essence of the life she had taken. And so that's where the idea of the soap came in. However, the first 2 women, their body parts didn't mix right, and so she couldn't turn them into soap. But then Virginia came along, and her body did mix with the caustic soda, and so Leonardo was able to make her soap. She was able to bathe her son with Virginia's body and feed him Virginia's blood. And so, in Leonardo's mind, she had done everything she could to protect her son at that point. Leonardo would ultimately be sentenced to 30 years in prison, as well as 3 years in an insane asylum, just as the fortune teller had predicted. Leonardo died in 1970 when she was 76 years old. As for her family, they fled Correggio, and 3 of her children changed their names and vanished. And her prized son Giuseppe, who she had killed to protect, had gone on to join the military, and he would go to war. And he either was killed in combat or simply changed his name and vanished as well. So that's gonna do it. If you got something out of today's episode, and you haven't done this already, please go into the like button sleeping playlist and change the 4th song to the loudest death metal music you can find. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. We have a podcast called the MrBallen's Podcast that puts out brand new, exclusive stories on Monday mornings. And on Thursday mornings, we upload remastered audio of our best YouTube videos. Again, it's just called the MrBallen's Podcast, and it's available exclusively on Amazon Music. Consider donating to our charity. It's called the MrBallen's Foundation, and it provides support to victims of violent crime, as well as their families. Monthly donors to the MrBallen's Foundation Honor Them Society will receive free gifts and exclusive invites to special live events. Go to MrBallen's Foundation and click on Get Involved to join the Honor Them Society today. We have 2 additional YouTube channels, MrBallen's Shorts and MrBallen's en Español. We also post near daily content on TikTok, Facebook, and Snapchat. All of those pages are just called MrBallen. If you want to get in touch with me, please follow me on any major social media platform and then send me a direct message. My username is just MrBallen, and I really do read the majority of my DMs. Check out our merch at Shop MrBallen.com, and if you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit, just called MrBallen. It's linked in the description below. So, whether I see you on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, read it, YouTube, Facebook, other YouTube channels, the podcast, wherever, just know that I really appreciate your support. And until next time, that's gonna do it. See y'all? I always tell my oldest daughter to do things that scare her because oftentimes, those are the things we actually want to do the most. And so today, I'm going to live up to what I always tell my kid to do because today I'm announcing my first ever live storytelling show. Doing a live event has always been so interesting to me, but it's actually just kind of terrified me, and so I gotta do it. It's going to be a digital live experience on February 16th, so roughly 2 weeks from now. And because it's so close to Valentine's Day, we decided to call the show the Valentine's Day Show. And this 1-hour-long show will just be me at my desk, with no script, telling you crazy, strange, dark and mysterious stories in real time. If this first show goes really well and people enjoy it, they want more of it, then I think there's a real chance we transition to a full-scale tour, or maybe I could be telling those stories in campgrounds, or in locations where some of these stories have taken place. We don't know yet, but it all starts with this first show. So to show your support and to tell us that you want a live tour, go get your tickets now. There's even some really cool, special, limited edition Valentine's Day merch that you can get as part of a ticket bundle. Also, I'll be doing a live QA after the show that you can get a pass to as well. Go to Moment. Call MrBallen's to get your tickets, to get your merch, to get your after-party passes. Again, that's Moment. Call MrBallen's. Happy Valentine's Day.